Today's reading from the Gospel is one of those fantastic sets of passages that I really think helps to bring the disciples into a human light. Warts and poorly timed thoughts and all. In the prior section of the chapter, the disciples had tried and failed to expel a demon from a child, a feat Jesus had to do himself, before telling them that he would be put to death and in 3 days rise. And yet, immediately afterwards, the disciples start to argue about who was greatest among them. He sat down and called the 12 and said to them, "Whoever wants to be first must be last of all, and a servant of all." And he took a little child and put it among them. And taking it in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me." Social standing is a serious and important thing within today's gospel reading. Within Israelite society especially, and in the greater Roman society, status was everything. Who you were, who you knew, who you served, all these things affected your standing. All these things put you in a hierarchy of importance and greatness. A farmer is below a merchant below a scribe below a priest, and a tax collector, well, they're below everyone. So the disciples have an interest in where they stand in the pecking order, and it starts to make a little sense. Here they are wandering through the towns of Judea with what seems to be a messianic figure, and they want to know who's top dog. Especially as at the beginning of this chapter, we have the story of the Transfiguration, where Jesus leads Peter, James, and John up into the mountain, and they witness the miraculous transfiguration, the appearance of Elijah, Moses, and Christ in white. An event they aren't allowed to talk about, but odds are they're pretty chuffed, and they want the rest of the disciples to know how special they actually are. This confidence in themselves, unfortunately, has not been tempered by the failure of the disciples to expel a demon from a small boy, something that requires the intervention of Jesus after the disciples' failure led to them getting into an argument with the scribes in front of a crowd of people. I like to think that argument was something of a petty back and forth about who's to blame for why the healing isn't working. You're a heretic. You're standing too close. You're doing it wrong, let me have a go. Then, Jesus has to expel the demon himself. They ask him how come they were unable to remove it. And Jesus' answer is a rather bruising one. This kind can only come out through prayer. Only through prayer. Makes you wonder what they were trying beforehand, that they hadn't considered prayer to be the initial approach. But I digress. This isn't part of today's reading, but I hope it helps to frame the mentality of what the disciples have been going through in the lead up to the passage. So we come to the text for today. We get two clear parts. Christ tells of his fate to the disciples. The Son of Man is to be betrayed into human hands, and they will kill him. And 3 days after being killed, he will rise again. It's quite an ominous statement. To them, here is Jesus, a friend and their leader, to be betrayed and killed. The passion narrative is laid bare before them. They hear it, they're afraid, they don't understand. They dare not say anything and they fall silent. But this doesn't seem to last. As the next we hear, they're all bickering over who's the greatest among them. Ladies and gentlemen, I present the human condition. Ego is an unfortunate trait we all have, a desire to inflate our self-value, to be the first, to be the best, to be the most important. So Jesus challenges this notion. And granted, it's a fairly repetitive line to the point it may almost seem like a cliche at some points, but it's still important and a relevant application. The first shall be last, and the last shall be first. Jesus turns the normal expectations of the social hierarchy on their heads. Not by getting them to line up greatest to least and saying the least is the greatest, but rather Christ takes a child, puts it among them and declares, "Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me, welcomes not me, but the one who sent me." Unlike in our own society, with children being precious symbols of innocence, a child in the ancient world, outside of the family bonds, is a non-person. They hold precious little value. The idea that Christ is essentially declaring his emissary, the one who they should treat as him in absence, is a child, is quite surprising. It's both countercultural and something in line with the nature of God from the Old Testament. King David was the youngest and least of Jesse's offspring, yet he was to be the king of Israel. Jacob, the younger brother of Esau, yet his line is from what the Israelites descend. Moses is the younger and less eloquent brother of Aaron, yet he is the leader of the Israelites in the Exodus. In all these, God takes the lowly, and from them makes greatness. And so it is with Jesus. The first will be last, and the last will be first. In the reception of a child is Jesus welcome. So the first is last, and the last is first. We receive them, and you receive me. What do we take away from this? Should I try to insist that the boss gets to the back of the queue? Well, no. If you start being fixed by that rule, then everything... Sorry. Well, no, if that becomes fixed as the rule for everything, all you're saying is that the first served are the least, and the greatest are at the back of the queue for later. Suddenly we're back to organising our society under a strict structure. The whole point is lost. When I first started going to church, I remember being curious as to, with the church procession, why the priest was always at the back. There was an old retired bishop who was explaining it to me about the idea of first and last, but sometimes that gets lost as he was talking to me about it. One point in a church he was at, two priests were bickering over who was most important, so who would go behind. And at that point, well done, you're back to trying to decide who's greatest. This instruction shouldn't be taken as a literal rule, in where it comes to as a spot in line, but more an instruction of a mindset to take into the world. It is a call to live in humility before God, rather than to focus on one's place of greatness, to reject the idea, I am the greatest, I am to be first, I am the most humble. Rather, each of us should simply work to try and be humble, to welcome the least. I'd like to end by reading out a passage from one of the writings of St. Augustine of Hippo, one of the most significant writers of the early church. Observe a tree, how it first tends downwards, that it may then shoot upwards. It fastens its roots low in the ground, that it may send forth its top towards heaven. Is it not from humility that all endeavours to rise? But without humility, it will not attain to higher things. You are wanting to grow up into the air without a root. Such is not growth, but collapse. So, may we all seek to ground and root ourselves in humility in all that we do. The Lord be with you.